new in this. Mankind, manpower, man-made. That's been happening for a long time. At the University of Hull, they are doing something about this. They're taking marks off essays unless the essays respect gender sensitivity, and this has immediately been called linguistic policing. For example, don't use he or she to describe people who could be either male or female. Use efficient instead of workmanlike. That's tricky because they don't mean the same thing. And supervisor for foreman, and not mailman but postal carrier. Well, you wouldn't say postal carrier anyway. You'd say postie, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I'd say postie, yeah.
So nothing new except the aspect now of losing marks. And I know it wouldn't be an issue in chemistry.
Oh, don't be too sure.
Would you mark down someone who used the word mankind in an essay?
No, I would not. But what I would mark people down for is a direct quote from this particular university where this originated, which is Hull University in the UK. The direct quote being, "Failure to use gender-sensitive language will impact your mark." Any university who uses the word impact as a verb is not worth the paper they're written on. I am sorry. So that kind of destroys their credibility. And as a chemist, I'm not going to rename manganese. I'm sorry.
Okay. So I take your point about Hull University's advisements. Is taking a kind of regulatory punitive approach the right one, Irene, or not? Or does it get people's backs up and have the opposite effect?
Yeah, I'm in two minds. I have heard people argue that those little things, you know, do have a greater effect and that they are worth thinking about and improving and all of that. And I've heard that argued quite well.
Yes.
I haven't ever subscribed to that, and I do find it a little bit semantics kind of end of things. For me, there are more important things, you know. I'd rather I was paid the same as a man to do the same job. I would rather I didn't have to be extra good to get considered for the same job or promotion or whatever.
Those hard things.
I would, you know, prefer I didn't have comments about my appearance at a meeting or in a workplace. So I'd kind of be more inclined to put my energy into those things.
All right, understood.
Yeah.
In terms, this is also on the same issue from the HSBC, the bank. In terms of addressing transgender people, it's offered its customers choices quite reasonably. But the question is, are there far too many choices? Because as well as Mr., Mrs., Miss and Ms, there are also now MRE, pronounced mystery, MYR, pronounced mere, PR, pronounced per, for person, just the letter M. And there are a number of others, depending on locale, and they include MX, which is pronounced mix or mux, which covers everything. That actually is MX, covers everything, all gender options. Would you, rather than a multiplicity of terms, would you sooner have mux or mix, or do you think we need the full range?
Well, wasn't the point of it to distinguish your gender? Otherwise, wouldn't you just have nothing?
Yes, but you're bound to get it wrong first time, aren't you, really? I mean, if the person's using it to you, you then know. But if you're trying to use it and decide, MX, I suppose the argument is MX would be.
I mean, if you genuinely don't identify with one gender or the other, then fine, think of something for that. Otherwise,
you don't mind the whole range?
I don't really mind. I'm quite happy to be a miss or a ms or a whatever.
Okay.
Just send everyone to university, get a PhD, and they'll all be doctor.
Now you're talking. That solves everything once you've got one of those.
Easy, yeah.
Alan Blackman, Irene Gardner, thank you both very much for being on the panel with us today.
Always a pleasure, John.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for your company, everybody. Checkpoint follows.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, police released CCTV pictures of the two men believed responsible for the Raid theft of those two Lindauer paintings. No to an SAS inquiry. What Bill English has just said, the serious assault of a Christchurch hospital nurse on her way to work over the weekend, highlights a desperate need for safe, secure car parking. Why over-the-counter painkillers like Panadine and Nurofen Plus could soon be prescription only. Batten down the hatches. Much of the country is about to get very heavy rain. Plus, from April 3rd, 1967 to April 3rd, 2017, Checkpoint is 50 today. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back after the news with Katrina.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. The government has ruled out an inquiry into the claims made in the book Hit and Run at the moment. The book alleges several civilians were either killed or injured in a raid on an Afghan village in 2010 that involved New Zealand Special Forces troops. The Prime Minister Bill English says the Defence Force has reviewed all the material related to the incident and found personnel involved took all feasible precautions to minimise civilian casualties and the destruction of property.
This morning I was given a detailed briefing by Lieutenant General Keating and a number of other senior officers. After considering Lieutenant General Keating's briefing, his letter to Mr Brownlee, and viewing video footage of the operation, I've concluded there is no basis for ordering an inquiry.
Bill English, the Defence Force says last week that people killed in the raid could have included civilians. The opposition leader has gone on trial in the High Court in Wellington, accused of defaming a Christchurch businessman and his wife, Earl and Lani Hagerman. The case relates to Andrew Little's linking of a contract awarded to the Scenic Hotel Group in October 2014 to run a resort in Niue and a donation of just over $100,000, which the Hagermans made to the National Party in September 2014. The couple's lawyer has told the court Mr Little's apology for corruption claims he made against a Christchurch businessman and his wife were too little too late, according to the couple's lawyer. Richard Fowler QC said the contract went through a standard process for awarding government tenders. Health authorities in Auckland have confirmed an 11th person has been hospitalised with typhoid. They say all the patients are members of the same Pacific church community. Sarah Robson reports.
The Auckland Regional Public Health Service is now following up with 60 people who are in contact with the infected people. The clinical director, Julia Peters, says they haven't yet pinpointed the exact source of the outbreak, but it's most likely to be contaminated food. Dr Peters says good hand hygiene and careful food preparation and storage are key to preventing the spread of typhoid. She couldn't put a time frame on when they might have the outbreak under control. Anyone who is worried should contact their doctor or healthline. In Auckland, Sarah Robson, Aho.
The biggest manufacturers of over-the-counter painkillers say it would be unfair on consumers to make them see a doctor for common codeine-based painkillers or cold and flu remedies. The Medicine Safety Council is to meet to consider tightening restrictions on the drugs, which can be bought at a pharmacy, including making them prescription only. Australia made the decision last year because codeine is addictive. The Self-Medication Industry Association represents the manufacturers of affected brands like Nurofen Plus, Codral Cold and Flu and Panadine. Its executive director, Scott Milne, says the vast majority of consumers use the pills responsibly.
This is a useful tool in the self-medication armoury. We won't solve the problem of those who want to abuse codeine-containing products by making them prescription only.
Scott Milne from the Self-Medication Industry Association. Art auctioneers are upping security after two valuable Gottfried Lindau paintings were stolen on the weekend. The paintings Chieftainess Ngatai Raure and Chief Ngatai Raure were taken early on Saturday after a stolen vehicle was used to ram raid the International Arts Centre in Parnell. Wellington art auctioneers Dunbar Sloan are selling a Lindau painting on Wednesday and have added another security guard after the theft. A Lindau painting, The Māori Princess, goes under the hammer at Auckland's Art and Object on Thursday. Its art director, Ben Plumley, says they're taking extra steps for peace of mind.
We have a security firm that polices our area. We have alarmed security, and the more valuable paintings in Thursday night sale are now coming down off the wall and going into further lock storage overnight.
Ben Plumley. The police have released CCTV images of two men who stole Lindau paintings in Auckland. The police say the two people killed in a light plane crash in the Clutha district yesterday were both from South Otago. Thomas John Evans, who was 30, and 26-year-old Jenna Frances Craig died after their light plane crashed on a farm property around Kaka Point at about 10 o'clock yesterday morning. Civil Aviation Authority investigators have started examining the crash site in a joint investigation with police. It's almost 5:05. To sport, and the American golfer Lexi Thompson has been denied a major victory in the cruelest of fashions. Thompson was given a 4-stroke penalty with 6 holes left at the ANA Inspiration in California, then lost to South Korean So-yeon Yu in a sudden death playoff for the title. Thompson was leading by 3 shots when told she had breached a rule while putting, but only after a television viewer had emailed the LPGA to inform them of Thompson's breach.
It's unfortunate what happened. I did not mean that at all. I didn't realise I did that, and I fought strong through the finish, and it was great to see the fans behind me.
Lexi Thompson, Lydia Ko finished in a tie for 11th at 7th under. Roger Federer won't play any tennis between now and the French Open, meaning he'll enter the year's second Grand Slam tournament without any clay court match play. Federer moves up to 4th on the world rankings after beating longtime Spanish rival Rafael Nadal in straight sets at the Miami Open final. Federer, who sat out the second half of last year with a knee injury, has won 3 tournaments, including the Australian Open, since January, and says he needs some rest.
I will only just play the French Open. I'll probably take 10 weeks off, recover with the body, prepare it again, so I'm ready for the French, if that at all, and then Wimbledon, all the grass season, and then the hard courts after that. So I think that I've been pushing the body enough now, so I just need to listen to its signs now.
Roger Federer. That's the news.
Rewriting the story.
Some of these children we know will cost $1 million by the time they get to age 30. That's a lot of misery.
A devastating theft.
We believe there's a possibility that just because of the way the burglary occurred, that there could be some damage to those paintings.
Promoting a change.
Young people aren't dumb. They're comparatively far more educated than older generations, and by that I mean no shade, but they just don't have faith in our political institutions at the moment.
A voice for everyone. Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson, Morning Reports, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, pioneering physician Dr. Charles Lapp on the often misdiagnosed and misunderstood conditions of chronic pain and fatigue. And after 10, spinning eggs, teacups and putting raisins in lemonade, physicist Dr. Helen Zersky takes us on a tour of the physics of everyday life. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met surface weather through to midnight. Tomorrow there is severe weather warnings. They're in place for northern and central New Zealand, Northland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupō. Scattered showers today, some heavy about Northland. Periods of rain tomorrow, heavy at times with localised downpours in Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers turning to rain in Hawke's Bay today with heavy falls about the ranges, rain spreading to Gisborne tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa, periods of rain, heavy at times. Nelson and Marlborough, patchy rain becoming widespread late tomorrow. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine but cloudy areas and isolated showers in Buller. Canterbury and North Otago, occasional light rain or drizzle. For the remainder of Otago, also Southland, a few showers near the south coast, spreading inland for a time today, mostly fine tomorrow. The Chatham Islands, rain today, cloudy periods tomorrow. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Radio New Zealand news and weather till 8 minutes past 6.
Good evening, I'm Kim Hill. Tonight on Checkpoint, we talk to Fiji's new Prime Minister.
Kia ora, I'm Philip Whanga. Tonight on Checkpoint, former psychiatric patients are being forced to live on the street.
Good evening, I'm Janice Applin, and on Checkpoint tonight...
Good evening, I'm Bronwyn Evans. Tonight on Checkpoint...
Good evening, I'm Jonathan Swass. On Checkpoint tonight...
Good evening, this is Checkpoint with Mary Wilson. In the programme tonight, the America's Cup crew show off their prize to the South Island, a move to put voluntary euthanasia on the political agenda in this country, and does one court decision mean that the official view on cannabis is easing?
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint, and if you are a long-term RNZ listener, it was 50 years ago today you were first welcomed to a program called Checkpoint. Yes, Monday, April 3rd, 1967, 50 years ago exactly, the first ever Checkpoint went to air. Tonight we look back. We're delighted to say Elizabeth Alley, who produced the program on day one, is among those doing the looking back. 50 years of Checkpoint, that's part of the program tonight. Thank you for being with us. Whether you've been here from day one or you are new to the program, we're delighted to have you. We're also looking at the Green Party list, the hard rain that's going to fall, the terrible mudslide in Colombia, over-the-counter painkillers heading even further back into the pharmacy, and Bill English saying no to an SAS investigation. Busy program as it has so often been over 50 years now. But we begin with the time at 5:10 with the latest on the ram raid theft of 2 Gottfried Lindau paintings in the central city Auckland suburb of Parnell early on Saturday morning. Police have this afternoon released CCTV images of the 2 offenders and of the car they fled in. The offenders backed a stolen vehicle into the International Arts Centre, grabbed the paintings, which experts fear will have been damaged by flying glass, and drove off in another car. Now that getaway car is crucial. It's a white 2016 Holden Commodore, and it may have been specced up. A witness says it had a kind of racing sound, a white 2016 Holden Commodore. It's almost certain that it's been abandoned or stored somewhere. Police are looking for that, but what they do have is images of the offenders. Here's Detective Inspector Scott Beard.
We've released today some images from CCTV of 2 of the offenders that were at the scene who stole the paintings.
Okay, you say 2 of the offenders. Do you think there are more than 2 or only 2?
We believe there is a 3rd offender who was driving the white Holden.
What can you tell us about the description of the 2 men you have some images of?
Okay, so the first person, who was wearing shorts in the image, looked like a male, sort of pale skin, medium build, wearing a red or orange bandana over his face, so we don't see the face, but in shorts and with shoes, and they appear to be white sole, black shoes with red or orange lacing.
And he looks Pākehā, do you think?
Well, he looks pale skin. It's difficult at night looking at the CCTV images and taking still shots from them.
Okay, and the second offender that you have an image of?
And the second offender is a male. He's taller than the first offender, probably a slighter build, and once again has his face covered with light-coloured bandana. He's wearing some black gloves and black trousers and a black hooded sweatshirt.
This is brazen, and it appears on the face of it to have been executed really well. Is your sense that this was absolutely planned and they really knew what they were doing rather than spur-of-the-moment opportunism?
Look, our investigation would suggest that this is planned. It's just not a spur of the moment, and that they've targeted the art centre. Whether they've actually targeted the 2 paintings themselves, we don't know. They may have just got lucky with those. Certainly, it would appear that these people have known what they're doing and have planned it.
It's a funny kind of luck, isn't it? Because the paintings are so distinctive that it's really difficult to work out what they're going to do with them. And I guess you have your ears to the underground, waiting to hear if they have gone into circulation already. What is your hypothesis? What do you think their plans are?
Well, we don't know why they committed the burglary and why they took the paintings. You know, we can speculate, but what I'd like to do is let the investigation run its course and point us in the direction and take us to where the offenders are. But in saying that, there's someone out there who will recognise that car or recognise the stance or demeanour of those 2 males who put in the photos, and who will know who they are. And that's what we're asking for. Contact the police or contact Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111.
And you can do that anonymously, right?
Of course, yes.
Okay, that's important. Can we talk about the car that was left at the scene? Where was that stolen from?
Well, that car was stolen from Parnell a short time before the burglary occurred. It was used to ram, obviously, the glass frontage of the art centre, and then was left there at the scene, and the offenders left in the white Commodore.
So they stole it, and they were just able to wire it on the spot, were they, and drive it into the window?
Yes, yeah.
Is there anything in terms of trying to talk to the offenders who may have obtained artworks that they didn't previously realise the significance of? Is there anything you'd like to say to them?
Look, if people or someone knows where those paintings are, it's really important that we get them back. Now, if it's through an intermediary, then that's fine as well. But the first and foremost is we'd like to get the paintings back.
If this was opportunism, if they didn't understand the significance of the work they were stealing, and how important it is to the story of this nation, they may in fact want to return it. Possibly, who knows? Are they able to make some kind of deal to do so? Are you prepared to enter into those sorts of negotiations?
Look, it's too early to speculate on that or make a decision on that. What I'm saying is that if someone knows where they are or someone wants to return them, then contact us and let's go from there.
Detective Inspector Scott Baird talking shortly before we came on air. The Prime Minister, Bill English, has ruled out holding an inquiry into the claims made in the book Hit and Run. The book alleges 21 civilians were either killed or injured in a raid on an Afghan village in 2010 that involved or was led by New Zealand Special Forces troops. Calls for an inquiry have been mounting, but Bill English says the Defence Force has reviewed all the available material and found personnel involved took all feasible precautions to minimise civilian casualties and the destruction of property. Bill English was talking a short time ago. He asserted the authors of the book, Nikki Hager and John Stevenson, made some significant errors.
There have been calls for an inquiry to reconcile differences between the accounts given by the authors and the facts provided by Lieutenant General Keating. This morning I was given a detailed briefing by Lieutenant General Keating and a number of other senior officers. After considering Lieutenant General Keating's briefing, his letter to Mr Brownlee, and viewing video footage of the operation, I've concluded there is no basis for ordering an inquiry. Should evidence emerge in the future that New Zealand troops acted unlawfully, the government would of course take every step to establish the truth.
Bill English speaking a short time ago. He says New Zealand's SAS has a good reputation internationally and for good reason.
The allegations in the book could be damaging to the reputation of troops who serve their country with distinction, including risking their lives to do so. I'm informed the allegations have also caused distress to the families who have had to endure the uncertainty of knowing their men were serving in dangerous circumstances overseas, but now being accused publicly of acting dishonourably. I want to assure those families that there is no evidence that this is the case.
Bill English talking a very short time ago, and 1 minute ago exactly a statement came in from Nikki Hager, Hit and Run co-author of course with John Stevenson. He says he is deeply disappointed by Bill English's decision not to have an inquiry. In part the statement reads, when the book came out, John Stevenson and I emphasised that Bill English had no responsibility for the deeds done in 2010 and so was in a good position to offer aid to the Afghan villages and launch a proper inquiry, but he has joined the people trying to hide and dodge over what happened. I believe this decision is the result of military pressure on the government, the tail wagging the dog. That is not good for the country. That was a statement issued by Nikki Hager at 5:16 in response to what Bill English said at about 4:30. It's 18 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint. Over-the-counter painkillers like Panadine and Nurofen Plus could soon be made prescription only. The Medicines Classification Committee will decide in May whether to tighten the rules for medicines containing codeine. And if the committee goes the same way it did with pseudoephedrine in 2011, that would not get more cold and flu medicines off pharmacy shelves unless you get a prescription first. This report from Rowan Quinn.
Codeine's present in dozens of easily available medicines, but is an addictive opioid. The US, most of Europe, Hong Kong and Japan have stopped the sale of over-the-counter codeine, and last year Australia moved to make it prescription only. That's prompted MedSafe to look at changes here. A leading Auckland addiction treatment centre says it's now seeing more people with addictions to codeine-based medicines, including one person who was taking a potentially lethal 90 Nurofen Plus tablets a day. The Community Alcohol and Drug Service clinical leader Suzanne Galia-Singer wants greater restrictions at the very least.
We are seeing a gradual increase, and we don't want this to become a crisis before we act on it. We're just trying to be proactive here.
An addiction psychiatrist and the clinical lead at the Capital and Coast DHB, Sam McBride, says while it hasn't seen an increase in addiction rates, there is a problem.
They're having to use it every single day, and that can often be very time-consuming, having to travel around lots of pharmacies, etc. They also, if they don't take it, they develop withdrawal symptoms, and that can be symptoms such as agitation, diarrhoea, aches and pains.
Currently, pharmacists must record the purchase of any painkillers containing codeine. The Medicines Classification Committee will look at a range of other options, such as restricting packet size, adding warnings or maintaining the status quo. The Self-Medication Industry Association, which represents the biggest players in over-the-counter medicines, like the manufacturers of Nurofen Plus, Panadine and Codral, says the vast majority of people use the medication properly. Its executive director, Scott Milne, says forcing consumers to go to the doctor is not the answer.
It's time-consuming and it's much more expensive. They either pay a doctor's fee or the government pays a doctor's fee. So what we want to do is make sure that we've got sensible tools available for self-medication where appropriate.
Scott Milne says the best solution could be a centralised computer system recording sales so addicts can't shop around. The addiction specialist Sam McBride says New Zealand needs to act now to prevent a problem with opioid abuse seen in countries like the United States.
They've had huge rates of death through overdose because of prescription opioids, and it's a problem they haven't really managed to get a handle on. In New Zealand, to some extent, we've been slightly ahead of the game and better prepared, but I don't think it's a problem we can ignore.
The Medicines Classification Committee will meet on May the 17th to discuss whether to tighten the rules or to leave the opioid-based medication on pharmacy shelves. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
Let's head south. A group representing nurses say the assault of a Christchurch hospital nurse on her way to work at the weekend is not the only incident that's highlighted the need for more secure parking options for staff. Parking space has been under huge pressure due to the increasing number of construction projects in the city centre, including the redevelopment of the hospital, which began in 2014 as a result of the earthquakes. The Canterbury District Health Board is warning things will become worse in the coming weeks with the loss of another 150 car parks on the street due to construction. Maya Burry reports.
An urgent safety warning sent to hospital staff from the Canterbury District Health Board on the morning of the assault said the nurse had just parked her car on Riccarton Avenue about 6 o'clock in the morning when a man wearing a mask grabbed her. The police said the man pointed what is believed to be a firearm at the nurse's head before she screamed and he ran away. A spokesperson for the New Zealand nursing organisation, Kristen Watson, says security for staff coming and going from the hospital needs to be improved.
Unfortunately, this is an extremely bad event, but there's been other incidents around security over the last month that we're pretty concerned about as well. The weekend before this one, cars were vandalised around Riccarton Ave, wing mirrors damaged, and about a month ago, one of our members was actually assaulted by a member of the public. It looks to be quite a separate event.
The hospital has 2 staff car parks, which together fit 700 vehicles. But Mr Watson believes on any day there may be as many as 4,000 staff at work. For patients and visitors, the Health Board has a shuttle service in place, transporting passengers from a car park 2 kilometres away to the hospital, but that's not available for staff. And Mr Watson says that means those staff working late and early shifts have to park some distance away and walk in some cases about 1 kilometre to get to work.
And recently our delegates started a petition calling on both the council and the DHB to put in better, more secure options for staff parking, particularly after hours. Part of that petition particularly refers to the risk of assault and people having to walk a very long way to and from their car in conditions that aren't secure.
A research doctor cycling to work because of the lack of car parking says she was recently struck by a car and knocked unconscious. She fears it's only a matter of time before someone is killed. Christchurch City Councillor Dion Swiggs is looking into whether a private car park near the hospital could provide some relief for late shift staff. But Mr Swiggs says the Canterbury District Health Board needs to lead change.
There could be some solutions. It's just a matter of getting the right people around the table and actually starting to ask those questions. And the District Health Board really needs to get involved as well and actually sort of look at this and actually have some sort of care for their staff in this respect as well.
The Canterbury District Health Board's Chief Executive, David Mates, said in a statement the current situation is far from ideal. Mr Mates said it is looking at developing a shuttle service for staff, but he said a permanent parking solution isn't likely to be available until after 2019.
We are working in a very tight fiscal environment. It's a challenging time for the Canterbury DHB, and any parking solution is likely to come at a significant cost.
Mr Mates said in the next few weeks another 150 street parking spaces would be lost due to construction. Meanwhile, the police say investigations into finding the offender who assaulted the nurse at the weekend are ongoing. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
Andrew Little's trial for defamation began in the High Court in Wellington today, despite his apology for making corruption claims against high-profile National Party donors. Their lawyer told the court that the Labour Party leader's apology was too little too late. The trial arose from comments Mr Little made last year, linking the award of a business contract to Earl and Lani Hageman's company to their donation of over $100,000 to the National Party in 2014. Our court reporter Anne-Marie May has been at the defamation trial.
The Hageman's lawyer Richard Fowler QC told the jury that in 2009 the Hageman's Scenic Hotel Group had the opportunity to run a resort in Niue. The contract was awarded and signed off by the Niue Premier in October 2014 and went through a government tender process checked by independent consultants. Mr Fowler said later on there was a $7.5 million upgrade of the resort.
That $7.5 million was paid to the owners of the resort, who in turn employed contracts. Wasn't paid to Scenic or the Hagemans or anyone connected with them. It never came through their pockets or their bank account.
Richard Fowler said in October 2014 Earl Hageman also made a $100,000 donation to the National Party. He said in April last year a radio news item reported the date of the awarding of the resort contract and the Hageman's political donation. He said the Labour leader Andrew Little then released a statement saying John Key had to come clean on how a donor who gave more than $100,000 to his party won a hotel management contract, leading to a $7.5 million resort upgrade. Mr Fowler read to the court some of the passages in the Little press release which concerned his clients.
Today's revelations about the Scenic Hotel Group and its resort contract in Niue stink to high heaven.
Mr Fowler said Andrew Little also claimed aid money earmarked for Niue was used to upgrade the resort.
This looks like the latest in a line of questionable deals from John Key's government, which has seen New Zealand slide down the international corruption rankings.
Richard Fowler told the jury his clients are each seeking $500,000 and damages of $50,000 relating to Andrew Little's media statement. They are also each claiming $100,000 and damages of $20,000 for each of 5 items about the statement which ran in the media. Richard Fowler said in an apology a little over a week ago, Andrew Little accepted no connection had been established between the donation to the National Party and the award of the hotel management contract and resort upgrade.
That statement is directed to establishment, lack of evidence. The Hageman's point is there is no connection. There never was any connection, period. And that's what the defendant ought to have faced and still hasn't.
Andrew Little's lawyer had the opportunity to make a brief opening statement to the jury but declined to do so. The case is expected to run for a week and is being heard before Justice Clark and a jury of 9 men and 3 women. For Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
We head now to Colombia, where more than 250 people are dead and the same number again are missing following those mudslides that have wiped parts of some communities off the face of the earth. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos says it's heartbreaking. A desperate rescue operation involving more than 1,000 military and emergency service personnel is continuing. The BBC's Richard Lister has more.
Macoa is a place of mud and misery. When the rolling wall of water and debris rushed through here on Friday night, it swept away houses, cars, trees and people. Whole families died here. The painstaking search for survivors is continuing. Rescue workers moving quietly through flattened neighbourhoods, hoping for sounds of life in the wreckage. Nothing here. With every hour that passes, hopes of finding more people alive diminish. Within hours of the deluge, message boards went up listing the dead and the missing. Many of those unaccounted for are children. We're searching for a baby, she says, a little baby. We can't find him anywhere. This man has lost his daughter. I hope somebody has her, he says. She's called Luisa. Closest to the river, the streets are now boulder fields, full of people trying to retrieve what they can of their lives. The shock of this disaster is still sinking in. In the worst affected areas, people struggle to find the places where their houses once stood. The rains that caused this flood were unusually heavy, but deforestation upstream played a part too. Emergency teams have been working here night and day since the river burst its banks. More help from the government is on its way.
There are
10 water tankers here and 10 more are on their way. We're also bringing water purification equipment and generators to ensure there is a clean water supply for the people.
For now, though, many people in this town of 40,000 still lack access to power and fresh water. The homeless need housing, the infrastructure needs to be restored and the wreckage cleared. Deep in the Amazon basin, Makoa was hard to reach before. Now, with roads and bridges washed away, the challenge is even greater.
That report from the BBC. $29 to 6 coming up on the program. When is a surcharge not a surcharge? Well, when a $750 camper van hire during the Lions Tour becomes $1,990 once the $1,240 Lions Tour surcharge is slapped on top. This is outrageous. We celebrate 50 years since the first Checkpoint broadcast, April 3rd, 1967. We have the Green Party list and what it means, known as Here with Business. But first, Katrina, who in honour of the first Checkpoint broadcast is going to read the news with very rounded vowels.
Not in your life. The government has ruled out an inquiry into the claims made in the book Hit and Run at the moment. The book alleges several civilians were either killed or injured in a raid on an Afghan village in 2010 that involved New Zealand Special Forces troops. The Prime Minister, Bill English, says the Defence Force has reviewed all the material related to the incident and found personnel involved took all feasible precautions to minimise civilian casualties and the destruction of property. A Christchurch businesswoman has told a jury she was devastated by allegations made about her and her husband by the Labour leader Andrew Little. Lani and Earl Hagerman are each seeking over $1 million from the opposition leader, claiming he defamed them in statements linking their business dealings to a donation to the National Party. Art auctioneers are upping security after ram raiders stole 2 valuable Gottfried Lindauer paintings from a Parnell gallery at the weekend. Wellington art auctioneers Dunbar Sloan are selling a Lindauer painting on Wednesday, while another Lindauer painting goes under the hammer at Auckland's Art and Object on Thursday. The biggest manufacturers of over-the-counter painkillers say it would be unfair on consumers to make them see a doctor for common codeine-based painkillers or cold and flu remedies. The Self-Medication Industry Association says the vast majority of consumers use the pills responsibly. Health authorities in Auckland have confirmed an 11th person has been hospitalised with typhoid. They say all the patients are members of the same Pacific Church community. Officials in the Queensland city of Rockhampton have revised down their flood predictions, but still say they're looking at a major flood event. Rain from Cyclone Debbie is making its way down the catchment. Those are the headlines. I can't speak in a rounded vowel accent, John. I just don't think I can.
Thank you very much.
Just so you know.
We will hear some fine examples of it before 6 o'clock. Stated the most magnificent rounded vowels you will ever hear.
I can't.
Come on, Nona, bang them out.
There you go.
Nona Peltier here with Business. A magnificent Canadian accent.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes,
okay.
that's
What's
right.
up, Nona? Shares in the listed medical software developer Orion Health did what?
That's right. Well, they fell 14% today, yeah. So that was because they came down this morning and said that they were revising down their revenue forecast by like 6%. So that's not great because they had been forecasting a 20% increase. So that's all comes down to managing expectations. They do feel that they will eventually realize those contracts, but they didn't occur in the financial year ended March 31st.
Sorry, so they went to the market predicting a 20% year-on-year increase?
Right.
And they are, in fact, down?
6%.
Right.
Yeah. So they say their shareholders have a right to be disappointed, and the shareholders reacted just as you would expect. The company says, look, we will make that up. They're still forecasting a profit for the current financial year ending March 31st, 2018. Meanwhile, not so good. And they may look at beefing up their balance sheet as well so that they can manage their growth opportunities better. So all in all, it's not a really great result for Orion. They fell down 14%. That's down by 27 cents to $1.66. And when you compare that to when they floated in November 2014, well, on that day, they hit a high of $6.79.
Holy moly, what are they today?
$1.66.
Shiver my timbers, that's a big old slip.
lot.
And
It
there's
is
been no
indeed.
splits or anything, that's just a straight fall.
That's right. That's all about what you do when you don't manage your expectations
Yeah,
with your
truly.
shareholders.
Yeah.
So anyways, look, the NZX Top 50 Index ended down the day. Ended up today. 0.4% by 28 points to 7,225. And I have a special little 50th anniversary bit of information. I was going to tell you what the dollar was worth 50 years ago, but I can't.
Because it didn't exist.
Exactly. We had pounds, shillings, and pence up until July 1967. So today, our dollar is steady at 70 US cents, 92 Australian, and 55.8 pence.
Nona Peltier, our Auckland business reporter. Thank you, Nona. When is a surcharge not a surcharge? Well, the campervan hire company who slapped a Lions Tour surcharge, it's rugby if you're not a big fan, they're coming here and they bring an army of supporters with them on customers booking during the tour, says it will change how it lists its costs, but not the price itself. The company has been criticised for almost tripling its prices for the 10-match tour in June and July by adding what it called a Lions Tour surcharge of 160% on some bigger vans. That's again raised questions about whether there is a wider problem with overcharging for the tour, profiteering, making hay while the sun shines, however you want to put it. Ian Telfer reports.
Venderkruisen raised some hackles by listing online a 4-berth camper van during the tour with a base rate of $750 for 10 days, but with a $1,240 Lions Tour surcharge on top. This afternoon, after it was contacted by media, the company changed the add-on's name to Seasonal Price Adjustment, though it hasn't changed the price. Venderkruisen's managing director, Sasha Vankin, wouldn't give an interview, but he told RNZ News the way the company listed its prices might have created the impression of price gouging because of the big jump up from its winter base price. Sasha Vankin says the Lions Tour price is only 80% of its peak summer prices, and the firm's been singled out simply because it was being transparent about the way it lists its costs. The chief executive of the Tourism Industry Association, Chris Roberts, says the price increases are a result of supply and demand, not price gouging.
The prices are much higher in summer when the demand's higher. The Lions Tour is going to create a mini summer for New Zealand in terms of the number of people travelling around at that time, and so the prices are going to be more like they are seen at the peak of the summer season.
There's also been reports of hotels and motels in Auckland and Wellington trying to charge more than $1,000 a night for a room. Chris Roberts says some operators seem to have got carried away, but there's no broad accommodation crisis.
The vast majority of Lions Tour fans coming to New Zealand already have their accommodation booked. It comes as part of their package. That accommodation arrangements, they were all in place months ago. It may be the fans who are coming to New Zealand without any tickets for the matches that are now getting caught out.
But the organiser of a free billeting service for visiting fans called Adopt a Lion says spiking prices are a problem. Adam Gilshnan says 500 New Zealanders have so far offered up beds, and hundreds of fans who are not in a package tour are keen to take them up.
They might have looked a long time ago thinking, it's only $100 a night, I'll just budget for that and that should send me right. So now they're thinking, I can't afford it, what do I do? I'm stuck. You know, we want repeat business, don't we? As a tourism market, we don't want people thinking, and they were just out to fleece us. So I'm hoping this helps in some way.
Hospitality New Zealand's accommodation spokesperson Rachel Shadbolt says people get aggrieved when prices skyrocket around major events.
These rooms are quite often the last room left. Quite often they can also be the likes of your presidential suite. Now, if it's not a product like that, if it is motels, then probably you have got people really just taking a punt and hoping that they will get guests who really are desperate for accommodation, and we don't necessarily endorse that sort of behaviour.
But Ms Shadbolt says when operators do try it on, it usually backfires.
Those who really do put the crazy prices out there generally find that they don't have any guests, because ultimately the public does decide what they're prepared to pay and where they're going to stay.
Ms Shadbolt says she wouldn't expect any pubs or restaurants to follow Vendor Kruisen's lead by introducing Lions tour surcharges on food and drink. More Checkpoint, ko Ian Telfer, aho.
20 to 6, an 11th person has been hospitalised in Auckland with typhoid, but health authorities are still trying to pinpoint the source of the outbreak. But the Auckland Regional Public Health Service says the cases are linked, and those who've been hospitalised are all members of a Pacific Church community. Sarah Robson reports.
Auckland Regional Public Health Service Clinical Director Dr Julia Peters says it appears to be a localised outbreak of typhoid. She says the priority now is getting in touch with 60 people who have been in contact with those who have been infected.
We know that this outbreak, or we are fairly confident this outbreak, is centred around a Pacific Church community in Auckland. We're working closely with them to work out how this situation has arisen and to manage it.
Julia Peters says contaminated food is the most likely source of the outbreak. But she says health authorities still haven't been able to pinpoint the exact source, and there's a chance they may not get to the bottom of it.
I guess our primary objective is to get this outbreak under control and not to have any more cases. If at all possible, obviously we want to find the source, because that means we can ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Julia Peters says good hand hygiene and careful food preparation and storage are key to preventing the spread of typhoid. But she is reluctant to put a time frame on when health authorities will be able to say they've got the outbreak under control.
All I can say is that we are doing everything we can to bring it under control. Part of this is when the actual event occurred, or whether it was over a period of time, and also when the incubation period of the disease. We've got to just be mindful of those factors when we say something's concluded.
Typhoid is spread mainly through contaminated food and water, but can be spread person to person. Symptoms include a high fever developing over several days, headaches, general weakness and muscle aches. Stomach pain and constipation are also common, but some people get diarrhoea. It is potentially fatal, but it can be treated with antibiotics. People who are worried should contact their doctor or call Healthline. For Checkpoint, call Sarah Robson, aho.
For most of its parliamentary life, the Green Party have relied upon the party vote to win its MPs. That's why, more than any other party, the Green Party's list is both its shop window and its merchandise. Where every other party in Parliament has at least one elected MP, the Greens have none and have only ever had one, Jeanette Fitzsimons. But they do have 14 MPs and are hoping for more. And the first draft of the party's 2017 list was made public yesterday. Our Deputy Political Editor Chris Bramwell sees green.
There are a few notable moves among the current crop of 14 Green MPs. First-term MP Marama Davidson leaps from 15 to 4 on the list. Julianne Genter, who stood in the Mount Albert by-election, moves up from 8 to 3. And Corrections spokesperson David Clendon drops from 11th to 16th. Green Party parliamentary staffer Jack McDonald has rocketed from 20th to a winnable 9th place. Mr McDonald has stood in a North Island Māori seat of Te Tai Hauru in the last two elections and will again this year. He's also been a regular and eloquent speaker on the Pai for the Green Party for several years. The 23-year-old says as a young candidate he hopes to inspire a new generation of voters.
If I was elected as an MP, I'd want to focus on extending educational opportunities and economic security to young people, because I feel like that's the areas where I can make a real difference to my generation. If you look at the numbers, at the moment there are 91,000 young people not on education, work or training. So our generation are disaffected with politics as usual.
Golriz Garaman is very excited to be coming in at 15 on the list, but is conscious of the fact that it's only the first draft. She says if she wins a place in the September election, she will be the first-generation refugee to be elected to New Zealand's Parliament.
I think that at this moment in global politics,
It's something that will mean different things to different people, but I think it will be a really powerful symbol of where New Zealand stands on some of the very divisive cultural shifts that have happened in places like the US and in Britain.
John Hart farms sheep and beef on a small holding in the Wairarapa. He's moved from 17th up to 12th on the list and says he believes the party recognises a rural voice is critical in the caucus.
Really, we want to try and show, I guess, rural New Zealand that we are not a threat, that we're just like them and we want the same things that they do.
And do you feel that the Green Party's lacked in that area, through its time in Parliament?
I think the party's done some really good work over the years, certainly in sort of rural policy, but when you come down to it, you need to have people like you in Parliament to represent you, and I think that's something that we can do better on, is having more representation.
Back up in the big smoke, Chloe Swarbrick, who ran third in the Auckland mayoral race, is one place down the list from John Hart at number 13. The Green Party's members now get to vote on the lineup, and the final list will be announced at the end of May. Atuiti whare Pārimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi ko Chris Bramwell-Aho.
Last year, 108 people died by drowning in New Zealand. In Christchurch, as they rebuild the city, including some school and community swimming pools, they're thinking about a response to that, and they're hoping for community input. No, you don't have to dig the pools, but if you're in our second largest city, your feedback on how children are best encouraged into pools and encouraged to get swimming lessons is being sought. Child and youth-friendly Christchurch is driving this, along with the council, who are seeking input on their draft annual plan, and they really mean they want your input. Bernardo's is part of Child and Youth-Friendly Christchurch, and Eve Lafferty told me they see families who simply can't afford swimming lessons.
Well, we certainly do through our work in Bernardo's. I mean, sometimes people in a city like Christchurch don't think there are any children living in poverty, but, the rates of poverty are just as high in Christchurch as in other cities. So, yeah, lots of families only have the basic, the minimum things that they need for necessities. Schools do a great job to try and access swimming lessons for their children, but as you know, obviously we've lost most school pools in the earthquake, and children may need more lessons or more experiences swimming than they get just through school. And and it's not just about learning to swim, it's also about having that quality time with their parents. And swimming is a cheap family activity, so the more accessible we can make it, the better.
Okay, so there are a number of options. Does Bernardo's have a preference?
Well, we would support all three.
Right, so that would be free swimming entry for children, $2 family days once a month, so mum and or dad can go too, and free swimming lessons. What about, this is terrible, because when we're talking about Christchurch, we always pick on dear old Fendleton. So if you're from Fendleton, I unreservedly apologise for the crass assumption I'm about to make. But what about families in Fendleton who can afford to go to municipal bars, who can afford swimming lessons? Is there some kind of means testing? Are you looking at that?
The council haven't put details in, but I think they probably would just make it free for all children. And I think the thing is, it makes it unstigmatising. All children can go there and have that, and it's actually a relatively small cost. You're talking $5 a year for the average household in Christchurch. I think for the sake of showing all children and young people they're valued and they can just go and have fun at the pool, I think it's a pretty small cost.
So free swimming entry for children would result in a $5 per household rates increase per annum.
Yeah, that's what the council have put out in their draft plan.
Right, so that's not a lot of money, is it?
No, and just also to say that the $2 family days, that's a 45 cents a year increase for the average household, and free swimming lessons for the most needy children is 30 cents a year. So we're talking really small money for a big benefit.
Eve Lafferty and people of Christchurch, your feedback is being sought on that. Right, it's Monday, April 3rd, 2017, and on Monday, April 3rd, 1967, a new current affairs program began on RNZ, which wasn't RNZ then, it was the New Zealand Broadcasting Corporation. Yes, Checkpoint is 50 years old today, which is a very long time for a daily news and current affairs program to survive. Our reporter Katie Gossett has been playing historian. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is a story 50 years in the making.
The year was 1967 and our Prime Minister, Keith Holyoake, was lamenting the ongoing war in Vietnam.
I wish I could say to you tonight that the end of the war is in sight. I can't say it.
Robert Muldoon, then the Finance Minister, was justifying the state of the economy.
Of course, we are going over a hump in capital expenditure with things like Manapuri and Tongariro, and no return until they're completed.
And capital punishment was on the agenda at the National Party conference.
The criminal should know that if he takes life, then at the court's pleasure, he may have the death penalty imposed upon him.
And that same year, for the first time, there was a radio program that Radio New Zealand's head of current affairs, Ken Funnell, promised would tackle those issues in a probing, questioning and analytical way.
What we know as current affairs today really took off with the launching of Checkpoint, a 20-minute program which every night singled out for scrutiny by way of analysis, interview or discussion, 2 or 3 topics thrown up by the news of the day.
And it was all available at the end of a telephone.
Checkpoint soon learned to cash in on radio's ability to get immediate on-the-spot reports. Nowhere was farther away than a telephone call. Or almost nowhere. We never did manage to get through to Phnom Penh. But speakers in Tokyo, Washington, London, Moscow, and a host of other places were at our disposal. The element of immediacy had entered New Zealand radio.
And it came just in time.
A few hundred yards offshore, the inter-island ferry Wahine is drifting helplessly backwards up the harbour. Most of the time it is obscured by driving rain and sleet.
The impact of Checkpoint's new form of storytelling was obvious just a year later when the Wahine capsized in Wellington Harbour, killing 51 people. A producer and later chief executive of Radio New Zealand, Beverly Wakeham, said that first-hand reporting conveyed the story to a wider audience.
That was really, radio at its absolute best, the immediacy, the colour, the ability to make that real and urgent for the rest of the nation.
But it wasn't easy. Elizabeth Alley was Checkpoint's first producer and found herself in the thick of that day's drama.
It was a pretty extraordinary event because gathering material on equipment in those days was much more difficult than it is now. It was heavy, unwieldy. There was a lot of emotion and high tension accorded to it. I was backwards and forwards between Wellington Hospital and Checkpoint trying to get comments from survivors. But we did get that program to air. It probably was a significant moment in Checkpoint's life.
A key feature of the program was providing quality news from overseas, and that meant suddenly interviews with London were live rather than pre-recorded. There was new technology to contend with, wideband lines to be booked, and foreign contributors to be wrangled into studios around the world. Elizabeth Alley says while things were sometimes fraught, one pleasure of the show was developing a whole team of international correspondents, even if she says it wasn't always the best paid gig.
We paid them, but we paid them so little that I remember one of our American contributors used to chortle, another cheque from New Zealand to frame.
But the program also featured a lot of local political commentary.
My husband was a political scientist at that stage. I brought him in as a contributor. He came in on many occasions.
And was that how you met him?
Yes, indeed it was. In broadcasting house level 2. It was the first Checkpoint marriage. I don't know how many more there were after that.
And there was also, very nearly, a Checkpoint baby.
I stayed working. I was pregnant with our first child. And I remember Ken Funnell getting terribly worried because, I was getting more and more pregnant and he was thinking he might have to do more than midwife just a new program.
Over time, the show grew up and changed time slot. It started out just after the 9 p.m. news and moved to 8:30, 10:30, 10 o'clock. But by 1980, it had settled in at 6 p.m. with a new 90-minute format and theme tune. But still covering the issues most important to New Zealanders. And in 1981, the immediacy of radio proved crucial once again, as Hewitt Barnsley reported from protests over the Springbok tour.
The sound you're hearing is the sound of police batons raining down on shields and crash helmets of protesters as the protesters once again try and break through at the intersection of Royal Terrace and Sandringham Road.
By 1988, Checkpoint had officially come of age, and it was time to throw a 21st. And they took the party to the airwaves.
Good evening, welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Kim Hill.
And I'm Bronwyn Evans. It's not every year that a program has a 21st birthday, so with all due respect to a constitutional crisis in Burkina Faso, a crash on the Albanian stock market, or a potential outbreak of democracy in Paraguay, tonight's program is unashamedly devoted to Checkpoint.
Yes, it's nostalgia night for all those faithful listeners who've spurned the attractions of FM radio, the young doctors, or mashing the potatoes for tea, in favour of the longest-running current affairs radio programme in the country, Checkpoint.
The team marked the milestone with a tongue-in-cheek, or should we say pithy, look at some favourite moments.
Right from its very beginnings in the late 60s, those iconoclastic years of free love, drug-crazed hippies and cheap milk, Checkpoint's trademark was its hard-hitting, pithy questioning.
Indeed, the pith of its questioning was unquestionable. Wolfgang Rosenberg with the then Minister of Finance, Robert Muldoon, 1968.
Now, the Monetary and Economic Council puts practically the entire responsibility for redressing our balance of payments on your shoulders, that is, the Minister of Finance.
Now, in case you're wondering, this was included as it's believed to be the longest question ever asked on Checkpoint, and it's still going.
How do you think New Zealanders' propensity to import can be reduced from 17% of expenditure to 14.5% with import controls abolished?
So, all up, this question took 2 minutes and 12 seconds to ask. And here's what Mr Muldoon thought of it.
Well, Mr Rosenberg, I don't know how many of the people listening to this program followed your figures, but quite frankly, I wasn't one of them.
Bronwyn Evans says the team were all knowledgeable senior journalists and they drove the tone and humour of the show.
There was always a sense of pricking the bubble or pricking pomposity or pricking a little bit about people who maybe were taking themselves too seriously, and that came out of the character of the people working on it.
That said, every day was a scramble to get stories to air. Lucky then that there was a soundproof room to let off steam in.
People used to go into the studio when emotions got too strong and scream, and nobody could hear them. It was very, very useful. I think every office should have a screaming room, which is what we had.
Hello, I'm Adele Broadbent, and on Checkpoint tonight, growing revolt in the Soviet Union.
Fast forward 6 years, and 1994 ushered in a new phase with the programme's first dedicated presenter, Adele Broadbent.
When I started there, I was so incredibly nervous because it was following some fantastic names in radio, and some really, really massively good thinkers have been through that program. It's a fantastic place to kind of learn your craft, or to hone your craft, I guess.
The team of dedicated Checkpoint reporters remained, even so things were busy.
I felt like we were on the fly the whole time, really. It wasn't a relaxing program, you can imagine, and we were pushing the barrow all the time. I think there were some fairly hard-hitting political interviews at that time where we put a few ministers on the mat, which were challenging but enjoyable. A lot of big changes to legislation and a lot of questioning to be done. It was a great time to be in Checkpoint.
That year, the team brought big international stories, notably the Rwandan genocide, to public attention. But at home, a major story was also unfolding.
In the programme tonight, 15 die as a viewing platform collapses near Punakaiki on the west coast.
By the time we went to air, it was, just such a huge story. And then we continued to follow that through. So, that became one of our flagship stories, I guess.
Technology was also playing more of a role. A reporter and later head of news, Don Rood, was at Papeete Airport during protests over French testing at Mururoa Atoll. He called into the programme on an early cell phone.
Getting interviewed live on air as I was running around being shot at with tear gas canisters and blasts. Eyes were streaming with tear gas, and it was just live radio at its best.
Checkpoint was, by this stage, a well-respected programme, and Adele Broadbent says its journalists had the connections to tackle any issue.
There was nobody we couldn't get hold of. If you felt that you needed to speak to somebody high up anywhere in New Zealand or overseas, we'd just go for it. There was nothing stopping us, really.
I'm Katie Gossett, and coming up in our next instalment, Checkpoint was about to enter a new era.
Quite wonderful listening back to that. I am 53 years old and I grew up in a national radio household. My mum and dad listened to national radio when I was very little. And so I feel like it was probably on in the background of my childhood. And Katrina Batten, you started working as an operator on Checkpoint, which is a sound technician, in what year?
Yes, probably 87, 88.
Wow.
When it was 22 minutes long at 8 minutes past 6.
Go, KB.
Yeah.
After 6 o'clock, Katie is going to be back. Looking at Checkpoint really over the last 20 years or so, so roughly the second half of the story, plus a family that's been saved after hours in the dark on the roof of their home on the northern Gold Coast. This was a rescue that was heroic, dramatic, and rather magnificent. And we'll speak to Jim Fletcher, who was one of the rescuers who dodged high trees, power lines and debris for more than an hour to reach a grandfather, mother, 2 children and 2 husky dogs and get them to safety. Now, speaking of heavy rain and bad weather, we are about to get it in New Zealand. The Met Service joins us live to tell us what's in store, and we have more after the news at 6. We're getting lovely feedback. Lots of people congratulating us and saying, gosh, I can't believe how long I've been listening for. We're delighted to have your company, and on behalf of everyone who has worked on Checkpoint for the past 50 years, thank you so much for being there.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batten aho. The Prime Minister says he's relying primarily on information provided by the Chief of Defence Force in deciding not to hold an inquiry into claims made in the book Hit and Run. He insists the Defence Chief is independent. Bill English says there's no basis for a wider investigation into the claims. The book alleges several civilians were either killed or injured in a raid on an Afghan village in 2010 that involved New Zealand Special Forces troops. Bill English says he trusts the facts of the Chief of Defence Force has presented.
The CDF is independent. He wasn't involved in the operation. He has access to video of the actual operation itself, along with all the planning that went into it, the review afterwards by ISAF. You know, we trust that process.
Bill English says the book has been discredited. A Christchurch businesswoman has told a jury she was devastated by allegations made about her and her husband by the Labour leader Andrew Little. Lani and Earl Hagerman are each seeking over $1 million from the opposition leader, claiming he defamed them in statements linking their business dealings to a donation to the National Party. The defamation trial began today in the High Court in Wellington. In evidence, Lani Hagerman told her lawyer, Richard Fowler, there was no discussion of business when the National Party president picked up a $100,000 donation from her home in October 2014.
Was Scenics business mentioned or raised?
Never.
Was the topic of the Niue resort raised at all?
No, it wasn't raised. It would have been totally inappropriate to raise it, but it was never raised.
Lani Hagerman says she and her husband made donations to several political parties, including Labour. A judge has ordered a retrial of a man who posted photos of his estranged wife in her underwear on Facebook after the police won their appeal against an earlier decision to discharge him. The man had been accused of causing harm to his wife under the new Harmful Digital Communications Act. He appeared in the Manukau District Court last September after he posted pictures of her lying in bed in her underwear. The woman said she felt stressed, angry and anxious, but the judge dismissed the charge, saying it did not meet the threshold of serious emotional distress. In the High Court in Auckland today, Justice Matthew Downs quashed the decision to discharge the man who has name suppression. Families and rescuers are searching desperately through mud-plastered rubble for victims of flooding and landslips in Colombia that have killed 254 people, injured hundreds and devastated entire neighbourhoods. Several rivers burst their banks near the southwestern city of Makoa, sending water, mud and debris crashing down streets and into houses as people slept. Volunteers and firefighters found 82 bodies downstream and said many corpses were still caught in debris. Many families stayed up through the night to search through the debris despite the lack of electricity in the city. A High Court judge has been told New Zealand can't rely on assurances from China that a man Beijing wants extradited on a murder charge will receive a fair trial. Kyun Yup Kim, who's been accused of murdering a woman in Shanghai in 2009, spent 5 years in Mount Eden prison until he was bailed in September last year. Edward O'Driscoll reports.
This morning, the lawyer fighting his extradition, Tony Ellis, told the High Court in Wellington Mr Kim shouldn't be extradited. He says recent comments by the Chief Justice in China that judicial independence is a Western concept that doesn't apply there showed Mr Kim would not be guaranteed a fair trial. This is the second judicial review Dr Ellis has taken, challenging the Justice Minister Amy Adams' decision to allow Mr Kim's extradition after a judge ruled last year China's assurances were inadequate. In her latest decision, the minister says she was satisfied by assurances from the People's Republic of China that Mr Kim would be subject to torture and the case would be actively monitored. This is Edward O'Driscoll.
The organiser of a billeting scheme for visiting Lions rugby fans says many have been caught out by high accommodation costs. A campervan hire company, Ventiskrisen, said it regrets describing the almost tripling of its prices for the British and Irish Lions tour in June as a special surcharge. In some hotels, motels and private houses are being offered at more than $1,000 a night. Adam Gilshnan, who created the Adopt a Lion webpage to get rugby tourists a free bed, says the problem is real.
They might have looked a long time ago thinking, oh, it's only $100 a night, I'll just budget for that and that should send me right. So now they're thinking, oh, I can't afford it, what do I do? I'm stuck. You know, we want repeat business, don't we, as a tourism market? We don't want people thinking, and they were just out to fleece us.
Adam Gilshnan says 500 New Zealanders have offered a bed, which he describes as an overwhelming response. It's 6:05. To sport, the Hurricanes coach Chris Boyd is happy some reinforcements are on their way back for the Super Rugby champions. All 5 New Zealand sides won on the weekend, beating 4 Australian teams and 1 from South Africa. The unbeaten Crusaders are sitting pretty at the top of the table following last night's big win over the Waratahs. The New Zealand sides did, though, lose another couple of players to injuries, with the Chiefs flanker Sam Cane going down, while Hurricanes loose forward Ardie Savea is expected to be out for at least a week with a calf strain. However, Boyd says Savea's omission should be offset by some returning players.
We've got 3 or 4 guys coming back for next week, so Corey Jane will be available for selection, Vi Fafita will be available for selection, Dane Coles hopefully will be available for selection, so you know, it's just the nature of footy at the moment.
The Hurricanes play the Waratahs at home on Friday. New Zealand golfer Liv Cheng has won her first tournament on the second-tier Symetra Tour. Cheng won the Gateway Classic in Arizona after defeating American Mina Haragai in a 2-hole playoff. The 23-year-old Aucklander carded a 2-under 70 in her final round to finish alongside Haragai at 7-under. And the Kiwis winger Dallin Watene-Zelezniak has signed a new 3-year deal with NRL club Penrith. Watene-Zelezniak has been an integral part of the Panthers' backline since making his first-grade debut in 2014. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tim here, creator of time-travelling steampunk science fiction for young adults. Part 2 of our window on the world of the potato takes us to the current spud superpower, China. Well, it would be, wouldn't it? And Jeff Hunt makes his debut as our new after-dinner scientist, making sense of the applied science that goes into constructing the buildings that contain our modern lives. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, and there's severe weather warnings in place for northern and central New Zealand. Northland to Taumarunui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupō. Scattered showers today, some heavy about Northland. Periods of rain tomorrow, heavy at times with localised downpours in Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, showers turning to rain in Hawke's Bay today with heavy falls about the ranges, rain spreading to Gisborne tomorrow. Taranaki and Taihape to Wellington, also Wairarapa, periods of rain, heavy at times. Nelson and Marlborough, patchy rain becoming widespread late tomorrow. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine but cloudy areas and isolated showers in Bulla. Canterbury and North Otago, occasional light rain or drizzle. For the remainder of Otago, also Southland, a few showers near the south coast, spreading inland for a time today, mostly fine tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, rain today, cloudy periods tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. You would have heard Katrina then use the phrase severe weather warnings. Joining us now on the phone is Met Services' Georgina Griffiths, because the weather is going to be foul, Georgina. It's lovely to have you with us. We think you're a fantastic forecaster, but what's happening? What's going to come?
Oh, John, it's been busy, I have to say. And this low coming out of the Tasman is a real rainmaker, and it's also got an area of severe gales around and a ring around it. And just so we clarify, this isn't actually the remnants of TC Debbie, but it does pick up some of that super tropical air from the Tasman that originally came from her, and hence the heavy rain warnings for central New Zealand and also Bay of Plenty, Rotorua and Coromandel. In fact, I can go through the warnings if you want. But
I think we'd love it, because there are people listening in these areas. So please, where should people get prepared to protect themselves as well as they can against very heavy rain?
That's right. So this, the downpours are embedded in 2 days of rain, John. So Tuesday, Wednesday, it sort of kicks in from tonight. And so it's a 2-day event with the risk of downpours from up to the North Island, also north of the south. So the key spots for rain warnings at the moment: Taranaki, Wanganui, Tararua Ranges, also Hawke's Bay in the ranges, and the coastal hills south of Cape Kidnappers. Quite large numbers in those regions. So Taranaki up to 250 millimetres on the coast, but 300 to 400 millimetres in the mountain. Yes, big numbers, 100 to 150 millimetres of rain in Hawke's Bay. Wairarapa as well, away from the Tararuas, lower numbers, 120 or so millimetres, forecast potentially up to 160 up the back. So quite a big chunk of the North Island, and watches and warnings all around those areas I've just mentioned. We're also on watch for heavy rain in Tomarunui, Taihape, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Rotorua, where the risk for downpour is really high in that particular area. Manawatu, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington, Marlborough and Nelson, all on watch for rain. And those areas have good potential to go into warning as we approach the event. We've just started with the watches and warnings have been in play for about 24 hours, and I'd expect the warnings to amplify and go from a watch to warning once we get some more certainty across much of central New Zealand. So if you live in the North Island or the north of the South Island, just keep up with the Met Service watches and warnings, John, because it is a pretty volatile system. There are also watches in place for wind, severe southeast gales in Taranaki, Wanganui, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, and also Bulla. These kick in later tomorrow and through into the early hours of Wednesday. So I have to talk about the impacted areas, particularly if you live in Taupo northwards through Northland. Obviously, we're very humid at the moment, and there will be heavy rain on Tuesday and particularly on Wednesday for these regions. We may see Taupo through Waikato, Auckland and Northland go on to warning as we approach this event, and the risk of downpour looks likely somewhere in that region on Wednesday as well. So it's that burst of heavy rain embedded in large-scale, long-term rain. It's probably of concern in particular for Auckland. There's a lot of landslips in the area, and we've had such a pummelling in the northern New Zealand, John. Wettest March on record, second wettest March on record, or whatever. It doesn't really matter depending on where you're talking.
Yeah.
After such a wet March, this is going to be an impactful event.
Georgina Griffiths from the Met Service. We so appreciate it, Georgina. That's really comprehensive, that forecast. But please do keep an eye on what Met Service is telling us over the next couple of days, because as Georgina says, it has the capacity to be really impactful, particularly in areas that have had slips and a lot of flooding over the past month. Speaking of which, 5 people are dead and 3 are still missing after the worst flooding in Queensland's history. 200,000 people affected there. Amongst the stories, some incredible footage has emerged from a place called Luscombe in the Gold Coast hinterland, where a house was swept away and broken up in floodwaters just minutes after a family was plucked from the roof. Really incredible pictures. A short time ago, we tracked down Disaster Management Officer Jim Ferguson, who was one of 3 emergency personnel who came to the family's aid and saved their lives.
It's the scariest thing I've ever done in my entire life. I did 14 years in the Navy, and I never felt as close to scared as I was out there. To give you some sort of idea, we're in a boat that's got 115 horsepower motor on. It's pretty big, it's not small. The team of 3 in the boat, we all had jobs to do. Claire was at the front with the spotlight, picking her way through the trees, trying to find out the best path for us to go through, avoiding power lines, power poles, cars, trees that were coming washing down towards us. Chris obviously was driving the boat and doing his best to stay calm, and I was navigating using a Find My Friend type application on the phone, which gave us an idea where the river should have been underneath us. Obviously, the river was much bigger than what it was, and yeah, very difficult to tell where we actually were, and we were trying to avoid fence posts and whatever. So it took us the best part of an hour to go 1.5 kilometres, so that'll give you an idea of how slow we were going.
Wow.
About 3/4 of the way up there, the motor stopped on the boat. If you can imagine, we also went, what the... Claire had the hindsight to tie us off quickly to a post that we were right beside at the time, so we didn't go anywhere, thank God. We pulled the motor up and found we'd actually picked up a fire hose that was been washed downstream, and it had wrapped itself around our prop. Once we got that back, got the motor going, we scooted upstream again. We used the local residents' knowledge. We came across a few of them on the bank telling us where to go, because we had no idea, obviously, where we were physically going. We actually picked up one of the locals very close to the house who knew where the house was. Had we gone straight to the house the way we were thinking, we would have hit a road that was just underneath the water. So he was with us in the boat when we physically got to the veranda of the house. We pulled the boat up alongside the second-storey veranda of the house, where there was a gentleman standing inside, already calf deep in water, so it's probably the best part of 6 to 8 inches deep of flood water running through their second story of their house.
That's the second story, right? So how high was the water? What, 10 feet?
Oh, look, whatever, a story plus another foot above that. So, yeah, probably about 10 feet. At the house location, probably 10 metres further out where the river really was, the proper river. Yeah, we tied up to the house, to the veranda. I climbed off the boat and spoke to the gentleman and asked how they got onto the roof, because there was a woman and 2 children on the roof. I asked him how did they get up there, hoping obviously to get up there an easy way. He advised me they'd climbed over the veranda, gone along a little annex that was probably over the first-story windows. In hindsight, that's probably what it was covering up. And then they put a chair on that annex, climbed on the chair, then climbed up on the roof. So the chair was still sitting on the annex. The floodwater was just lapping at that annex when we got there. I climbed over the veranda, got onto the annex on my hands and knees, crawled to where the chair was, stood up, and found them sitting, all 3 of them still sitting quite calmly at that stage on the roof. I spoke to them, just say, look, we're here to rescue you. How are you feeling? Just general chit-chatting, I suppose, in hindsight. We agreed to take the little girl first. The little girl was about 6, maybe 5, 6. She was calm. I took her in my arms, carried her down off the roof, put her onto the annex with me. We hands and knees approximately, 4 or 5 metres, hard to say now, back to the veranda. I handed her over to the guys on the veranda who, took her. I went back, got the boy, same again, came back, got mum, same again, hands and knees, back to the veranda. Granddad didn't want to leave the house. He wanted to stay because he had 2 huskies with him, so he's got 2 big dogs standing next to him on leads. Now, SES policy is not to take animals on the boats. It's just dangerous if they get out of control. It can hurt people. The huskies, however, were pretty tame, and Chris actually has huskies, and he was really emotional that we should take them. So we all agreed we'd take the dogs, and they were super calm too. We just picked the dogs up, and Granddad, everyone in the boat, let go of the boat, took the boat over to the shore, which was only about no more than 40 to 50 metres away to dry land. The sun was coming up at this stage, so we were starting to see the state of the river and what was going on. About 10 minutes after we got them alongside, there was a big crack out in the river. We all naturally looked that direction. The house that we were just at sunk about 2 feet into the water, then bobbed back up again like a little cork, want a better word, and started moving downstream. It was obviously gone. It hit the house next door, did a bit of a pinwheel, and then I think you've probably seen the footage on the news. That's probably why everyone's excited. Pinwheel hit the next tree, hit a tree, then hit the telephone wire pole and splintered up and broke into a number of pieces. The video you actually see is taken by the neighbours, and the owner of the house was standing with them at that time, so they saw it right in front of them. We just all just had a bit of a cry. We sat down and we did a what if, what if we'd been late, what if we'd been tied up, what if, all the what ifs.
Tim Ferguson, who really did risk his life to save the lives of others. 6:18, a former assistant to Wellington Airport's chief executive has been jailed for fraud, forgery and obstructing justice. 31-year-old Jenna Davidson was today sentenced in the Wellington District Court for crimes which came to light in her new job at the Accident Compensation Corporation. Our reporter Tim Graham was in court for his sentencing.
Early last year, Jenna Davidson was sentenced for defrauding Wellington Airport of about $40,000. At the time, the judge referred to a glowing reference from her new employer, the Accident Compensation Corporation, which read a media article about that reference and began investigating. It later emerged Davidson had used an ACC computer to forge the reference and had also racked up another $40,000 of personal spending on one of its credit cards. Davidson's defence lawyer, Mike Antanovic, today told the court his client was the victim of domestic violence throughout all of her crimes.
Her sole motivation in respect of this offending, sir, was for survival, not greed. At the time and at all times, her better judgment was completely eclipsed by her own circumstances, by what she was going through, by desperation, I suppose, by fear.
Davidson used her ACC credit card for 181 transactions, including a spa treatment and purchases of clothing and homewares from several stores, including Kirkcaldy and Staines. She also spent $1,000 on gambling and almost $600 on Sky TV. Mike Antanovic said the last few years of Davidson's abusive relationship were the worst and coincided with her offending.
None of this offending committed by Ms Davidson would have occurred but for those personal circumstances, but for that regular, ongoing abuse by a man against her.
The Crown Prosecutor, Rob Giorgio, said it was without doubt a very serious crime.
The defendant had gone to some effort to hide her spending in terms of recategorising it how it appeared on the internal ACC papers, sir. And so in the Crown's submission there was some sophistication in this offending.
Davidson sat in the dock crying as her fate was decided. Judge Chris Tui described her offending as protracted and repeated.
The abuse that she reports, and which is corroborated by charges, contributed to her conduct. But I think it's not justified to say that it would not have occurred without it.
In the end, Judge Tui imposed a prison term of 2 years and 9 months. He said prison would impact on her 8-year-old son, but it was the only option available to him. In Wellington, for Checkpoint, Tim Graham.
50 years ago today, a new current affairs program called Checkpoint began on Radio New Zealand. And we're celebrating that tonight by looking back. In the first hour, we look back at the beginning of the program. It's changing time slots and lengths and a tiny sample of the events and people the program has covered. Katie Gossett picks up her history of Checkpoint just before the end of the 20th century.
Good evening. This is Checkpoint with Mary Wilson.
It was 1997 and a revamped Checkpoint stormed onto the airwaves, and with it a host who was to stay with the show for nearly 2 decades.
Why couldn't the public trust you to tell them that there was doubt about whether your Foreign Affairs Minister was telling the truth?
Well, that's not really the issue we're addressing today, Mary, but what I will say is
it's an issue about trust.
What I will say is I'm not in the habit of reporting on private conversations when they happen.
And as in this exchange with the then Prime Minister, Helen Clark, when it came to quality, rigorous interviewing,
I think people want to know why you didn't say publicly when you knew that there were 2 versions of events.
Colleagues agree there was always something about Mary.
I think that goes to the public perception about your ability to be straightforward and honest.
Well, frankly, Mary, I don't share that judgment. I've run a very straightforward, honest government.
Mary Wilson soon developed a name for asking the questions people wanted answered.
I'm a reporter, and you owe it to people who are listening to ask those questions, and if you can't be bothered asking those questions, then you shouldn't be doing the job. You've got to care about that.
But in 1997, the team of dedicated Checkpoint reporters had gone, and it fell to Mary Wilson and the programme's new editor, Don Brood, to put the show to air with some support from the newsroom.
It was frantic, yeah. We just went flat out from the time we started to 6 o'clock. And we continued like that. Actually, I cannot remember for how long, until I think that we both decided it might kill us, and they gave us an intern.
For Don Rood, the brief was to change Checkpoint from a more in-depth current affairs show to a daily news format.
Checkpoint had a good, loyal following, but once we started to get that pace of stories and that getting out into the action and Mary's high-quality interviewing, We had something that no one else was doing. No ads, just news. And it was exciting, and it was dynamic, and it was exhausting, but it was, great fun. It was exhilarating.
He says Mary squeezed admissions from people and extracted information that many wished they'd withheld.
Sometimes afterwards, these people would be quite upset that they'd spilled the beans, and some prime ministers and cabinet ministers were in this list of people that let you know that they didn't like deviating from the party line and that Mary should just take the answers she's given. Well, that's journalism, and that's the skill of a great interviewer.
Sometimes the producers would say, oh, they've asked if you're doing the interview, and they would say, could she be nice? So, I was aware of that kind of view.
But she believes the tough reputation was sometimes exaggerated.
Scary Mary? Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I mean, I always made sure that the people who were telling their story, who were ordinary people, I mean, I was never like that to them, never asking them questions in terms of, holding people to account. I think that in some ways the reputation was exaggerated and people kind of built on things. It's the media, Katie. Always exaggerating.
But she did relish interviewing bureaucrats, cutting through superfluous jargon to get to the real story.
Those sorts of interviews, they were exhausting in a way, but you had to hang in there and to extract the information and get clarity was, I felt, a really great achievement, and I felt really proud of those.
Breaking stories brought their own pressure, and Checkpoint provided rolling coverage of events like the Canterbury earthquakes and the September 11 attacks in the US.
Good afternoon, this is Mary Wilson with a Checkpoint special on national radio. Today, the terrorist nightmare that's rocked the world. Thousands are feared dead after airliners crashed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon.
One of those days that we worked flat out trying to get as much material live onto the program as possible. I mean, it was a defining story of this generation.
And as with any live program, the team learnt to cope when things went wrong.
So you could get Don saying, wind it up now, because he was expecting the person to be on the phone, and then they weren't there. So no, keep going. No, end now. Ask another question. I mean, in the moment you do ask another question, you cannot say, I don't know what to ask you anymore. You got to keep going. It was pressure, and I think that either you do it or you don't. And I discovered that I could.
And she recalls that on one occasion, when a live interview had fallen over, a newsroom reporter also went the extra mile.
Eventually we dialed the fourth person on the list, who was a reporter, I won't name him, who happened to be in the toilet midstream when we crossed to him. He did a very good job.
At the end of 2015, Mary Wilson moved into news management, but reflects fondly on what she terms a great gig.
I'm glad to have been a part of it, really. It's a little bit of history, a little bit of radio history.
And then last year, another milestone in Checkpoint's history.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint with John Campbell on RNZ National. We're on the radio, as Checkpoint has always been, but we're also screening live on...
RNZ launched a multi-platform show reflecting a new era in technology, hosted by a man who little dreamed of this opportunity when he started as an intern at Radio New Zealand in 1989.
I never ever saw myself as a presenter. Presenters were other people. They were people much older than me, much more experienced than me, with much more gravitas and authority.
But as a reporter, Checkpoint was on his radar as a place to hear serious, credible journalism.
If you got a piece onto Checkpoint, it was a big thing because it meant that it really stood the scrutiny of the EP. And I think my first few Checkpoint pieces were real rites of passage.
John Campbell says he wants to retain the rigour Checkpoint is known for, whilst fulfilling what he sees as his mandate, to attract a new and more diverse audience to the show. And part of reaching more people is telling their stories.
I am living in Te Puia Marae.
And what's that like?
It's pretty cool. It's cool how they opened up their doors to us.
Where were you living before Te Puia Marae?
In our van.
And who was in your van every night?
Mum, Dad, my 3 brothers and 2 sisters.
John Campbell says he's not one to look back and keep score when it comes to interviews, but he is proud of the show's work tackling issues like poverty and homelessness by talking to those most affected, like 11-year-old TA.
TA, what do you want most of all in the world?
A library.
And he believes stories like this one are powerful because they teach others how alike we all are, including those who've traditionally been denied a voice.
How, whilst they assume sometimes the level of almost caricature, bums, dropouts, failures or whatever, actually they have very real hopes and aspirations too. And that was very powerful radio, I thought, listening to TA tell us the story of her life and her dreams.
The show currently pulls a live drive time audience of almost 240,000 people, but many more watch it live on Freeview Channel 50 or the RNZ website's video stream, and others view it later on Facebook.
People are coming up to me and saying, I'm really enjoying Checkpoint. And I'm saying, how are you getting Checkpoint? They say, I'm for Facebook or I'm watching it later. And for me, that's something I'm really proud of. So if we can get those people and retain our traditional audience, then that will be the achievement of the new Checkpoint, whilst holding tight to the values of the 50 wonderful, incredible years that have preceded us.
Today, Checkpoint is believed to be New Zealand's longest-running current affairs show on either radio or television. And just as the fledgling programme learnt to harness the immediacy of radio, 50 years on, the new Checkpoint is delivering to a digital world across a range of platforms. But the goal is still the same: quality coverage of the stories that matter. I'm Katty Gossett for Checkpoint.
Thank you, Katie. Lovely work, and that's Checkpoint for this evening, the 50th anniversary of the first day the New Zealand Broadcasting Corporation put a program called Checkpoint to air. The current Checkpoint team under our executive producer Pip Keane, our associate producer Catherine Warbridge, our producer Bridget Burke and Zach Fleming, Michelle Cook, Kelvin Samuels, Brad White, Katrina Batten, and our brilliant revolving roster of soundies, Blair, Rangi, Jeremy and Jeremy Veal, who's on tonight, would like to end tonight by thanking and congratulating all the women and men who've preceded us on this program. Technical staff, producers, reporters, presenters, some of them famous,